a woman fell from the height of the square all the way down the stairs and cracked her head and was totally unconscious at my feet. And in that moment, the screaming started and the people and the worried, and her husband was in the toilet still up on the square, and mayhem. And she was non-English speaking, but her son and daughter-in-law were English speaking, so I was able to say to them, right now we have a choice. I don't know what's going to happen for your mum, but we could sit and talk to her and hold her hand, or we can scream and I will support you to do whatever it is. But this is my invitation to you. And I stay in touch with that son, and he just in that moment made a decision to trust. So we sat on the ground and they spoke to her in her own language. And they just were talking to her and just comforting her, just assuring her, assuring themselves. So the hysteria went from hysteria down to this really calm, loving, sitting on the concrete.
And what was the outcome for that woman?
Welcome to Don't Be Caught Dead, a podcast encouraging open conversations about dying and the death of a loved one. I'm your host, Catherine Ashton, founder of Critical Info. And I'm helping to bring your stories of death back to life. Because while you may not be ready to die, at least you can be prepared. Don't Be Caught Dead acknowledges the lands of the Kulin Nations and recognises their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and First Nation peoples around the globe.
Today we are speaking with the founder and managing director of Natural Grace, Libby Moloney. Libby Moloney's role is to nurture and develop her team and business as they strive to provide authentic, sustainable and beautiful funeral care. So today we'll be actually chatting about holistic death care. Now, Libby, you describe yourself as a holistic funeral director. Can you please explain what that means?
Thanks, Catherine. It's lovely to be here with you. So holistic funeral care really lies in the word, or that holistic word. So if we look at what that really means, it's to look at the whole person in their whole context, in the entirety of their relationships, how they've lived, what are their values, what are their principles of life, what makes them laugh, what makes them smile, what's really authentic to them. So it's holistic in terms of how we sometimes consider healthcare or any other holistic approach to the human condition. So we coined the term holistic funeral director because the world understands the term funeral director. We couldn't really move away from that. We really prefer the word guide, but the world's not caught up to that and it doesn't Google very well. But we needed to keep that going. But we wanted to say, how do we communicate to the community that this is a model of care, an approach to care that will really look at who you are, how has that life been lived, and how is this end of life, death care, funeral ceremony, and return of the body to nature going to look like. So that's where we coined the term holistic funeral director, and it's now being used quite commonly by other holistic practitioners as well, which is lovely.
It's a really lovely title. It sums it up perfectly, actually. And can you share with us, how did you start, or when did you start Natural Grace?
So Natural Grace it shares its birthday with Dying to Know Day, which I didn't realise at the time. It's sheer coincidence at the time. We both started in the same year, so that was really lovely. So
we'll just tell people what Dying to Know Day is as well.
Yeah, Dying to Know Day is a national day of conversation around dying and death and being prepared. What would you do? What would you like? Do your family know your wishes? Really around what we call death literacy. And it's become a national day, the 8th of August, and people all over the country do wonderful events, all sorts of things, from death meditations right through to big expos and showing of films and conversations, and asking people to make a commitment as to what they'll do about their own preparation for the end of their lives. So it's a marvellous day. Easily Google Dying to Know Day, very straightforward. And so we happen to share our birthday with them, which is just lovely for us. So we've been, it's just delicious. So we will be 12 this year. So we've been going for a while now. And what originally happened for me was that I was widowed as a young woman. I was 26 when my husband died, and our child was 2. And it was a time where very much perfectly acceptable but very conventional funeral care was really all that was being offered. So his funeral was professionally organised, it was dignified, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. But what didn't happen was he didn't come home and let me care for him at home. I don't have a lock of his chocolate brown hair. He didn't have a natural burial. He didn't have a home funeral. He didn't have all these things that I now learnt or modestly have created or have linked from all the other great teachers that are possible and legal and are very beautiful. So that led me to quite some years of study and research around how could this have been different? It wasn't that it was bad, but how could it have been more reflective of him? So he was a poet and had a great stage presence, and he should have had a big poetry slam in our back paddock is what should have happened for his funeral. But anywho, that was a lot of study and research and talking and traveling and really finding out what do other cultures do, what do other countries do, what happens in our own Indigenous communities, where is really meaningful end-of-life experiences and death care coming from, and how can that be different? And I'm an accountant by profession, so I had a businessy background, and I had resisted conventional funeral directing because, don't tell anyone, but it's actually pretty boring. Like the actual funeral directing, tick the box, book the cemetery, buy a coffin stuff is death event management, and it's a very important part of our work, but it's not the beautiful part of our work. So I resisted that for a long time, and then I just couldn't find it. So I woke up in the middle of the night one night and said, oh, I'll do it myself. So Natural Grace was born as quite a pragmatic response really to a deep need in me to bring my experience and my capacity and my love for other people to the world through holistic death care. That was a long answer. Sorry.
No, it's a great answer. I love it. I'm intrigued in those early days when you were doing that initial research and traveling. Do you remember one thing that stuck with you out of that time that you went, yep, this is what I want to try and recreate?
Have you recently had a loved one die or know someone who has? We recognise this time can be very challenging for you, and you can feel quite vulnerable and not know what to do. We certainly didn't know what to do. That's why we have developed a resource for you called My Loved One Has Died, What Do I Do Now? This resource guides you through the steps you need to take in the first few hours, days, weeks and months after a loved one has died. A link to the guide, My Loved One Has Died, What Do I Do Now? Can be found in the show notes of this episode. Talking openly about death and grief can sometimes be triggering. If you find you need support, please reach out to our support services and the bereavement organisations listed on our resource hub. All links are in the show notes of this episode.
Yes, it was actually probably the experience with one of your other guests, actually, the remarkable Zenith Virago, who really shared from the generosity of her heart. She's a very generous human being, and many, many travellers on the journey of finding out, do they want to come into this death care space, contact Zenithan and make the trek to Byron Bay and go and sit and have a cup of tea with her. And she shares. And what she really brought into my consciousness was that, and it was just literally scribbled on the back of a serviette, was that it's an integrated experience that we have, that we live, we age, or we're diagnosed with a life-limiting illness, or there's trauma, accident, or something happens, and all of a sudden, or gradually, we end up at end of life. And then we live with a life-limiting illness, then we sort of enter palliative care, or we're in an acute palliative situation, and then we die. And then there's differing experiences after death. There's immediate after-death care, what we call vigil keeping, being with the dead, and how imperative that part of the work is. Then we have ceremonies to honour lives lived, and then we have the return of bodies to the earth through burial or through cremation, and then we enter sort of early bereavement time. So the accountant in me that was seeking to say, how can this be something that people can really access, that it's not just talked about in beautiful settings, like even dying to no day events kind of thing, that it's actually, you could hear from someone about the concept of, say, shrouded cremation or, say, natural burial, and that you could actually ring someone up and go, I've heard about natural burial. Can you help me provide that service? So that link in that moment with her of sharing that wisdom, and that doesn't really belong to anyone. That's ancient wisdom of understanding what it is to live and to die. But her capacity to communicate that to me at that pivotal time was really remarkable. And it just aligned beautifully with the skills that I've got. And so then I was able to say, okay, how can I actually be on the other end of the phone? And someone could ring me up and say, I want to provide funeral care for my mum at home. I don't want to use a funeral director, but I do need someone to pick her up from the hospital and bring her home. And can you help me with a coffin? And I wanted to be that person. So that's really where it really went clunk. This is possible for me.
From the way in which you're explaining it, Libby, for me, it sounds like that it explains the process of dying not just as one thing, but perhaps a series of different compartmentalized kind of processes, I suppose, or steps. Would that be the way in which you're talking about the vigil and then...
Yeah, I don't know if they're necessarily, I suppose they are compartmentalized, but they're really just this beautiful natural flow. So it's a trajectory that we all go through. And we start when we're born. From the minute we're born, we're dying. Let's be frank. But there's a commonly understood time that a series of events would start to make us think what's going to happen for me at the end of my life. And then hopefully it's this natural aging, but of course it's commonly diagnosis of something awful. And as I say, trauma can change that too. So we sort of move gradually through it. It's like that is a thing. And then we go, oh, we're going to get treatment for, say you've been diagnosed with cancer. We're going to get treatment, and many people, you'd never say all, but many people would pursue available treatments to them in the hope of cure. But when it becomes clear that cure is not available, that there isn't anything more that can be done, then we look to acceptance, to comfort care, to, beautiful end-of-life experiences. Some people talk about things like bucket lists, that sort of stuff. And then that time living with a life-limiting illness is often where you hear of great change in people's philosophical view or their capacity to say I love you to their people, to say I'm sorry for things that might have happened, to say, I forgive you, like those concepts of the sort of top 5 things of the dying or regrets of the dying, I think the book's called. And you look at those really deep experiences. People who say, I want to be at home. That's imperative for so many people. And the evidence shows us that. So people explore all those things, and then we start to be really into what we kind of call the dying time. So it's not a step 1, now we're into step 2. It's so fluid, and people go back and forth a little bit in that time where they do have just, I wouldn't quite say remission, but, improvements in their health. And I mean, I know someone that's been discharged from palliative care, got kicked out. So, back you go, you're too good, off you go. So, you can move around a bit in there, but you sort of move naturally through and in it. And then the acute dying time, so palliative care might be involved. There's a lot of focus on pain management, on psychosocial, comfort, making sure that the care team are really supported as well. And then we do die. And again, that you're 100% alive until you're dead. There's nothing between those two things. You're either pregnant or you're not. You're either dead or you're not. You 100% alive, and your life is so precious. And then the death occurs, and that's sort of like a surreal kind of like a veil that lifts, and the person flits through, and the others are left going, oh, we're here now. So it's very magical, really, and quite beautiful. And then from there, we go into immediate care of the body. The sacred and respectful care of somebody's body is really, really important. But equally, we jump into sort of the immediate care and needs of the people that have loved that person, and where are they and how are they and what do they need in that immediate time. And then that time we refer to as vigil time. So really from the point of death until either the funeral ceremony, or often people will keep their dead at home for sort of 3 days, and then they'll ask, could you come and take them into our care, the holistic funeral care, and then the ceremony might happen a week later or something. You never quite know what that's going to be, but there's this magical couple of days of attending to the body, and depending on the spiritual belief or religious beliefs of the family and the person that's died, there's this universal sense of escorting them while their soul sort of separates from their body, and that if we keep them company and stay in that space for a couple of days, the natural and sort of ethereal experience of their soul truly separating and going on to whatever it is that the person believed in. And it does twofold. It satisfies the need and promises that are often made that we won't leave you. We'll make sure our family stays with you to the person that's dying. But it also meets needs that often the living didn't even know that they had, which is to give themselves time. And over 3 days, we see this. It's breathtaking what happens in 3 days, where the human condition will move from devastation, often not even able to walk or talk, through to lifting a head up, through to being able to have a shower, through to coming back and washing and dressing the body, through to day 3 where they're like, oh, I'm actually okay now. I don't need my person's body to be near me in order for me to function. I'm ready to let their body go now. It's quite amazing to be witness to.
And is that something that your team assist with?
We do. And it would be significantly one of our points of difference, if you like. I mean, people are in the market looking for care, and if you're looking for guides, which is why we prefer the word guide than direct, because we don't direct anybody, but if you're looking for a guide, someone who can safely hold your hand or walk beside you while you navigate those experiences. That's what we are as holistic practitioners to be able to do. And they're all very carefully trained people by both in-house with us, but also through preparing the way end-of-life doula services and education who specialise. This is their specialty of training people to be end-of-life doulas. And then the next stage of that, if you like, that progression through that integrated model is again a very gentle step, and it just sort of happens where people start to put their head up and go, oh, I'm ready to organise a funeral now. So then, I mean, funerals are event management on speed, quite frankly. It's how do we get, at the moment we're organising for 500 people to be in a weatherproof environment in the Macedon Ranges with 5 days notice. So it's just like, how do we quickly pull this together, and still have it be beautiful? So that's where I plead all your listeners to please do some end-of-life planning. If nothing else, share what they'd like for their funerals. And then the process, then you sort of move through that ceremony. I mean, we could talk for hours just about ceremony and ritual and how important that is. And then we move into returning somebody's body back to nature is an incredibly important part of that integrated experience that we have at end of life. It's not, I hold really deep concern. There's sort of, it's become a bit de rigueur to say we'll just essentially get rid of the body through a direct cremation, get rid of them. Really, sorry, I shouldn't say that so disrespectfully, and I really don't mean to, but it's a perfunctory role. Let's just get them cremated, and then we'll have a memorial service and all those things later, or maybe even nothing at all. And my heart actually hurts for that. I think that's going to create deep complication in the next generation or the next years to come of the lack of opportunity that comes to be really deeply part of our death rites. And if we sort of outsource them so extensively as to really just send the body off and maybe do something later, I think we're missing the opportunity to integrate the loss deeply into who we are. That's there. So I think returning the body to nature is really important part of it. Doesn't mean you literally. I mean, there's a thing called witnessed cremation where you can actually see the coffin going into the cremator. Now, that might not be quite everybody's cup of tea, but certainly, escorting to the cemetery or fondly, saying farewell from the end of the ceremony, or some aspect where you've been connected to that process, I truly believe is a health and well-being issue for the surviving family and friends. And then burial, of course, there's all sorts of things that the whole ceremony and ritual, a whole funeral can be just around a grave. And they're quite spectacular and beautiful. And the ritual of filling a grave yourself, all these old traditional ways. When a community fills the grave and bury their own dead, the energetic exchange between them and the healing that you pretty much will literally watch happen takes about 45 minutes. And the spades get passed from person to person, and everybody does as many as they can. And when they're ready for a rest, they pass the spade to the next person. And this incredible weaving of love and respect and help. And the older people sit and just be part of it, and little kids help. And at the end, there's this incredible pride from saying we buried them ourselves. And yet only 100 years ago, that's exactly what would have happened anyway. So we've actually mucked up so much of this stuff by sterilising it and outsourcing it.
Yeah. Can I take you back to that moment when you were talking about that period of, we've used an example of someone who might be terminally ill, and how do you then create it for those families who have suffered an accident or a trauma that's unexpected? How do you take them on that same journey? Do you mind talking me through that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, something sadly that we do specialise in as well. with the right guide and the capacity of that guide to trust themselves, to be able to make suggestions, to be able to assure a family that something's okay. So often these things are best explained by a story. So being with families in intensive care and the heartbreaking decisions being made that the support needs to be turned off. The care offered by our major hospitals and that have got ICU units and the support that goes into families to get to the point where that decision's been made is overwhelmingly good. Very, very few people report that as being badly managed anymore. I think in the day it might have been, families might have been excluded from a lot of that, but that's not generally true anymore. Families are deeply included and they are asked, who do they need? So some families might say, I need my priest to come, or they might need the pastoral carer, or increasingly an end-of-life doula to come and play that role in their life. And then because there's still people aren't quite sure yet what they want, they'll say, I want my holistic funeral director to come. So you get this moment to sort of step into even a critical space like that and be able to, if you like, use your experience as a holistic death care practitioner to assess the situation really quickly and listen to what you're being told and then draw on this sort of, if you like, sort of toolkit that we carry around with us and say, how can I help right now to bring the benefit of what would have happened if this death happened at home? So had this happened at home, there would have been time for massaging the person's hands or feet, or there would have been time for cooking a delicious meal and giving them little tastes, or there would have been time for whatever is meaningful to that family. So in one particular situation, the wife of the man that had died or was still alive, still on life support, but that decision had been made to turn his support off. She was quite, I suppose spiritual, if you like. So she was really attending to her needs quite well, and it was her that chose for me to come in. But the gentleman's dad was a much more conventional, I'm going to say not hippie in inverted commas. And he was the poor man, he was just struggling, really struggling as to how he could catch up so quickly to what had happened to his son and sort of watching all these rituals of the spiritual wife. And I was just able to come alongside him and say, here's some cream we just carry in our kit. We've just got a cream that's got a gold leaf through it. And the symbolism of the gold is how precious this person has been to you.
Oh,
so I was able to just come alongside him and just say, here's this gold cream, and I know how precious your son is, and this gold represents that. And I'm wondering if you'd like to put some on him. And, he just looked at me and he couldn't speak, and so I just lifted the sheet and exposed the man's feet and just myself, just a little tiny bit, just massaged the tips of his toes with this gold cream. And it took about 2 seconds and he gently pushed me out of the way and took over. So in ICU, before any time had come, he just massaged and anointed his son's feet. And 45 minutes he just was in a trance of just whatever he was telling him, whatever was going on between them. And so in just a moment you can find the thing in trauma. Yeah. And another time was my business partner, Jackie Morgan, and I were displaying our offering at the Melbourne Sustainability Festival. And it's down back then it was on Burring Mars. So you come down off the squares, off those big concrete steps, and you're running along the river. And I just stepped back from our stall to take some photos, and a woman fell from the height of the square all the way down the stairs and cracked her head and was totally unconscious at my feet. And it was just awful. But again, in that moment, the screaming started and the people and the worried, and her husband was in the toilet still up on the square, and mayhem. And she was non-English speaking. She was from China, but her son and daughter-in-law were English speaking. So I was able to say to them, right now we have a choice. I don't know what's going to happen for your mum, but we could sit and talk to her and hold her hand, or we can scream and I will support you to do whatever it is, but this is my invitation to you. And they just, and I stay in, it's a long time ago now, and I stay in touch with that son, and he just in that moment made a decision to trust. So we sat on the ground and they spoke to her in her own language, and they just were talking to her and just saying goodbye, really. They didn't know that yet, but they were just comforting her, just assuring her, assuring themselves. So the hysteria went from hysteria down to this really calm, loving, sitting on the concrete moment. And when the ambulances arrived, they're going, well, what's going on? Like in that moment, we could bring holistic care or gentleness or kindness or calmness that you do generally experience with a really well-managed plan for end of lifetime into an acute setting.
And what was the outcome for that woman?
Yeah, that lady did die. She had a catastrophic head injury from that. But they got 10 days with her and before they had to turn the machine off. And yeah, it was awful, absolutely awful. But, when her son stayed in touch for a very long time after, and occasionally still does, it just goes back to that moment that he got to say all the things that he wanted to say and be with her and offer comfort to her and minimise a little. I mean, they were going to be in for a dreadful experience. That was pretty obvious by how bad her injuries were. But they had a young child. So he just said, we know that could have been much worse if we hadn't had that opportunity to just sit quietly with her in that space. So
that's phenomenal because it's that instantaneous fight or flight response. And for you to be able to say to a complete stranger and bring them down and calm them down is amazing.
Yeah, it was a very privileged place to be. And, there'd be many people that would say the universe, that was her story and I was meant to be there. I don't know. But it just happened. And the other part of that story is what Jackie witnessed. She was standing in the marquee and her knowing that her place was to stay across and hold the space for me to then hold the space for them. So, yeah, it was, and I think we've all got that capacity, at one level or another. What we've done is become petrified of everything. We've become so scared of death. We've become that, as you say, that fight or flight, and we've really been taught, I think, over quite some time now to fly. That you protect yourself first, and any emergency services people are listening to this, they saying they're the fight people. They step in, they do it all the time. They're wonderful, wonderful people. But the general population, we need to talk more. We need to decide, how do we as human beings want to be right now? The power of now. What do I want to happen right now? And how do I want to look back on this moment? Did I step in or did I step out?
And tell me about the importance of holding space. What is holding space? Because that seems pretty important in that situation, because it seems to be a conscious decision that you have to make.
Yes, in a critical situation, it's very conscious. What am I going to do right now? But in general, so as human beings, we're actually holding this concept of holding the space we're doing for each other all the time. So it's saying, I am here, and I will be here alongside you with no conditions, with no intention or need to fix, with no outcome that I'm tied to, is with a totally open heart. I will sit here with you in whatever this is for you. And the best exploration around that is the work of Heather Plett. And she is the absolute master educator around that concept of holding space. And it's what we do professionally all the time, and what we do privately all the time, of course. Any parent would say that they know what that feeling is. We're holding the space of particularly our adolescent children all the time, where they explore and stretch, and we're sometimes with bated breath, waiting and saying,
I was going to say, sometimes it involves counting to 10.
Yes, a lot of the time it involves counting to 10. Yes, darling, that's a great idea. You see how that goes. Anywho, it's a beautiful concept, and it's giving language to what, well, hopefully we're all doing, but particularly in end of life and dying and death care in general, the temptation to come in and rescue people, or I'll make it easier for you by taking that away from you, that is damaging. That I believe, and professionally I believe, the kindest thing we can do and the most helpful thing we can do is to come alongside each other and say, I'm here to walk with you, and if I need to carry you at points, that's fine too. But often just having someone to walk alongside us, we can find the strength or the energy or the whatever to do what we need to do. And what we absolutely know to be true is the families who provide the important and essential care of their dead and themselves overwhelmingly report back to us with how satisfied they are, how proud they are, how proud they know their dead person would be. And that makes a significant contribution to their ongoing bereavement, compared to families who say, it was taken off me, that that somebody else was in charge, I didn't get what I wanted, it was dreadful, those sort of experiences. They often carry that complication to their grief forever. So one of our KPIs, if you like, at Natural Grace is we come back after a really big funeral day, and our practice coordinator will be there waiting for us to welcome us back into the space, and she'll say to us, how did you go? And with great joy and glee, we'll say, we did nothing. And she goes, yay! And sometimes there's champagne and gin, sometimes there's cups of tea. It just depends on what day of the week it is and how long the day's been. And what we're saying in that is, we held the space, but actually that community did all the work. So they filled the grave, or they conducted the ceremony, or they carried the coffin, or they made the coffin in the first place, or they whatever, any number of things here. So our goal is that we can support people to find their own way in it. And what we know now, after many, many, many years of this approach to holistic funeral care, is that stands them in exceptionally good stead for the next step of that integrated journey that we were talking about, which is their early bereavement. So they're coming off this really firm platform of deep satisfaction, of pride, of deep respect, of knowing they've done it themselves. It's such a healer. It's amazing.
That's amazing. Now, let's just change it up a little bit, Libby. I was wondering if you can talk me through what eco funerals and green funerals are.
I can. So our definition of that is what we don't do. So if you look at the kind of things that happen in funeral care conventionally, and you might have noticed throughout this I've used two terms. One's traditional care and one's conventional care. Conventional care is what I would call the funeral industry as it stands in general. It's not bad care, it's not anything, but it's conventional. Whereas traditional care to me is, and to us at Natural Grace, is home, people dying at home, people being cared at home. The whole concept of a funeral parlour came from the dead being laid out in the front parlour of people's houses, and that's where it came, that it's family-led, that coffins are made by family, that the holes dug by family, the graves filled by family, the ceremonies, all those old, beautiful old rituals. And that to me is traditional care, and that's what we are committed to bringing back. So if you look at conventional care in the funeral industry globally, there's a lot of things that happen that don't have to, that have a significant environmental impact. And some of the examples are embalming of bodies. That's a process that's rarely needed, and certainly not legally required, and came from a place, I believe, of good intention in the conventional industry, which is to make dead people look as nice as they can, or that they're just asleep, or sort of in a kind intention to ease the fact that they are actually dead. So there was also a belief that it was hygienic, and yet we know the World Health Organization says there is no risk to the living human from a dead human. That's just not true. Notable diseases aside, I mean, there's a couple of listed diseases. There's always an exception to everything, but for the vast majority of the population, there is no risk to the living from a dead body. So hygiene isn't a valid reason, and there's a list of other reasons that I might get in trouble for if I talk about too much. So embalming is not something that's needed. In many parts of the world, graves are lined with concrete. So that's a whole lot of resources that just aren't needed. If you look at the construction, the sort of the life cycle of the materials and the worker conditions and the place of manufacture of most coffins that are on the market is significantly environmentally damaging. So when we look at what is I don't particularly like the word green funeral, but eco-conscious or eco-friendly funeral, we're talking about what we don't do. We don't embalm. We don't use coffins that are full of glues and have come from a million miles away. We talk about natural burial, so a shallow dug grave where there's lots of oxygen in the soil, and the decomposition of the body is really rapid, really clean, and really low impact on the environment because the carbon dioxide gases aren't produced from going down so deep where there's no oxygen. We talk about Natural Grace. We're proud to say we've pioneered the practice of what we call shrouded cremation. So conducting a cremation without a coffin at all is simply a shroud bearer and the body wrapped in cotton. So it's really about how we run our business. So the main resources we need to use are a fuel for our cars and utilities, so our electricity for keeping our cooling going, and they're our main things. So we offset those through various programs, and then the rest of it is just not using it. We don't have chemicals on our site. We don't embalm bodies. We encourage shrouded burial and cremation. It's really about saying, how can I leave with as gentle a footprint as I tried to make in my living time? And that's really what it is.
And
Yep.
you've also embedded these principles into your sustainability policy.
Mm.
And you've also committed to the environment through your business practices. I'm referring to your support of the local land care group and
Mhm.
15 trees. Can you explain a little bit about that support?
Yep. So the support to land care we actually do through a financial donation, so an amount of money per funeral that we feel we asked them what was our best way that we could best help them, and they said that they need some funds for operating. So often it's very, I'm going to say, sexy or appealing to say let's just plant more and more trees, but organisations actually need help to be able to run those tree planting occasions. And so we just wanted to really be used to them in a way like that. And then 15 Trees is a great organisation, and we recommend that families access it. Often, instead of in lieu of flowers, it might be that people purchase a tree through them to honour the person that's died. Again, big offsetting way of offsetting uses is by the tree planting that they do, and it's run by beautiful people, and it's just a pleasure to recommend them and align with them. But
We'll make
essentially,
sure we
yeah,
include a link, in the show
yeah,
notes.
yeah, Colleen's just a great person and so dedicated to what she's doing.
And so they're planting trees as a carbon offset?
Mhm.
Yeah, great.
Yep, yeah, they're great. So
And are they up locally near you?
I believe they do tree planting all over the Australia, or in many parts of Australia. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
So you jump on their website and you'll be able to get a sense of it. But it's more, it's how accessible they are. So families and communities are often looking for a means to express their condolence or to express their gratitude for knowing that person, and they want to increasingly, communities want to do something that they think the person would have liked, not what they want to do for. So the 15 Trees feels this really lovely invitation to community to say, if your person loved nature, here's a really great place to put your $15 or your $25 instead of maybe doing something that didn't really align as much with that person.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, I thought we could talk a little bit about your role as Vice Chair on the board of the Holistic End of Life and Death Care Australia. That's quite the mouthful. So, Holistic End of Life and Death Care Australia.
So we
So,
call
talk a
ourselves
little bit about HELD. Yes, I think I'll go with the acronym of HELD. So, what is the purpose of the organisation? Talk to me a little bit about it.
So the purpose is to unify and give voice to holistic end of life practitioners. And that is people such as end of life doulas, ourselves, holistic funeral directors, for palliative care workers, volunteers. A lot of celebrants are looking to practice holistically to be able to expand their service into end of life guidance and things as well. So it's really saying, how do we come together under one umbrella as a professional association and give voice to, give guidance to, create guidelines of practice, code of conduct, standards of care for people who are practicing in this field, because it's an increasing field of professional practice and volunteerism. As we've got this aging population, more and more people are saying, how can I be in service at this time of my life? And there's a growing, a growing profession, really, of end of life workers. And there's nowhere else that really says we'll lead or create an association, create a way for us to be united and connected to each other. So HELD is an emerging. It's very young, and the chair is Helen Callanan, who's in my admiring opinion, is the leading end of life educator in Australia, possibly the world, and she's doing a marvelous job leading that the group of us as an executive to how we can be in service to professionals. In the olden days, we commonly use the word like pastoral carer was a known thing. Often the institution of churches, there was a group of commonly women, but men as well, who provided guidance and care and support at end of life. There was often someone in that group who knew how to wash the body and lay out the body. There was, the sort of community service that came from institutionalized religion. And as those groups have sort of, essentially diminished, if not disappeared altogether, there's a gap in communities of death literate and death comfortable people to say, I know how to navigate this space. May I be in service to you? And it sort of came naturally or organically through the remarkable people that were part of the fellowship or the in service groups of churches, and then we kind of lost it. Those people have aged or died out themselves. And the church's institutionalized religion just isn't replenishing itself with that level of volunteerism. And the economy is not allowing, particularly traditionally, women to be just solely at home and volunteering. So there's this big section that's gone. Then we've got an incredible palliative care community and professional response in our country. Big gaps depending on your postcode lottery, but overwhelmingly where it is available, it's amazing. And these are highly skilled clinical practitioners who have got caseloads that far exceed anybody's reasonable timeframes. And so we know there's a gap between not what's wanted to be offered, and by no means a criticism of palliative care in any way, but it's not possible to meet the need. And so the end-of-life doula in particular is coming into that space and saying, we are a non-clinical, would never give medical advice or intervene in any way in the clinical or medical advice given by palliative care or the doctors or anyone, but we're a social, emotional, spiritual support resource and response to human need at end of life. And that field is growing rapidly. And so HELD came into the space to say, how can we represent you? And so, it's a beautiful group, amazing group of people, and some really great ideas coming around and a lot of resource sharing, but also providing to classically palliative care, amongst others, other health settings, that if you use an end-of-life doula, other holistic practitioner who is a registered member of HELD, then you can be assured that that person is being supported, that they've got guidelines, that they are, complying with the code of conduct, that they've got insurance, that, all those things. So it's an important piece of work because good intentions alone don't give you a ticket to waltz into Peter Mac and say, well, I'm here to help. Everybody else in that place has got insurance and a code of conduct and, guided by standards of care and who are held account, and there's a complaints policy and all those things. That's just a reality of our time. And with deep respect, there's people in the end-of-life community who disagree. They think that death care or end-of-life care should be anybody to anybody. And within families and within personal relationships, of course that's true. But I think if you're purporting to offer a service, then it's important that you come with the support of a professional association that backs you up and not supports you, but also holds you to account. Yeah.
I agree with you, Libby. As someone who is not an expert in death care, that was the first thing that I thought, that if I was going to be referring anyone, I need to be referring them to industry associations. So there is that quality assurance, there is that code of conduct. they can also find someone locally that is a member, so they can reach out to someone that they don't have to hopefully, go too far to find someone, whatever their need be, at whatever stage. So, I totally support that. Now, tell me, you offer specialised funeral care for infants. How has all of that came about? And talk me through the care and what is the specialised care that's offered when you look at infants?
Yeah. There is different types of grief. There just is. And the grief we experience when an elder dies who's lived a big, long, full of challenges, full of joys, full of ups and downs life, we're in a place of being able to gently let them go. And that grief is fairly manageable for us as people. And then you and not everything I say is for everybody, of course, but in general, people can grieve their elders relatively comfortably. When you have sudden death at any age, but in the adult population in particular, there's a level of trauma that goes alongside, or can be a level of trauma. So what's defined as a traumatic death is quite different to what's defined as a sudden death. So traumatic death often involves violence or negligence or some other factor, whereas a sudden death can be your classic sort of has a heart attack and died, awful and sad, but it's not because someone else did something wrong, like a car accident or medical negligence or suicide is another layer. So we do respond differently to different death experiences. And when babies die or when pregnancies are lost, the grief experience and the response of parents, young parents often, is a different form of grief and a different form of response. And the loss is multifaceted because not only has the pregnancy been lost, if you like, and the hopes and dreams of the future have also been lost. The vision that was held for how this family unit was going to be created is lost. And depending on the stage of pregnancy, this is solely my experience and my personal opinion. This is not based in any medical or clinical evidence. This is what I think. There's a surreal point in pregnancies that I've seen where the baby, if you like, is the pregnancy of the person, whether it be the mother or both parents, and often of a whole family, bigger family. And somewhere in the pregnancy, the focus actually is, there's another person in there. And that's where we differentiate between pregnancy loss and a stillbirth, or pregnancy loss and the baby died. Because there's a point, and for some people it's around the point of viability, where if that baby was born, they would live, even if they had complications. For some families, it's even just past the point of 20 weeks when the pregnancy is considered a registerable birth. Before 20 weeks, it's not. Any number of things, but there seems to be a point where the pregnancy is lost versus the baby is lost. And that is an interesting difference in how, even in that one community, people respond differently. So we felt very strongly that we had a skill set in our holistic practice to be really able to come alongside young parents, or parents often who are often young, and say, how can we be with you in a really modern context as to how you may want to honour the life of your baby or to acknowledge and recognise this pregnancy. And it's a particular approach that we take that's about 2% funeral directing and 98% holistic guidance and care and holding space and creating opportunities for parenting. So we offer vigils for families so that babies mostly born in hospital. Their parents, hospitals have become incredibly good and beautiful at after-death care, and they use cuddle cots and all sorts of things to support families to keep their babies close to them. The days of babies being whipped away and all that are gone, thank goodness. But still, they're still in a hospital setting. So commonly day 2, day 3, they go home and the baby might stay at the hospital to be then transferred to the funeral director or whatever's going to happen. And what we've found is there's an increasing interest in babies being taken home with the parents, like the families still go home together. So we support that, escort that transfer home. We use either a special form of dry ice or what's called a cuddle cot, a little cooling unit to support the care of the baby's body, and take the family home and settle them in. And beautiful things can happen. The cot gets used. The baby often is still put in the pram and taken for a walk, can meet the family dog. Grandparents can come and visit. Like, a lot of magic can happen in those couple of days.
Mm.
And if that's not suitable for families, the parents often come with grandparents or aunties and uncles or other siblings to our sanctuary and have a vigil day. And in that time, they could maybe bath the baby and dress the baby. They often prepare the coffin. One of my most amazing vigils was the family were in our lounge room. So our sanctuaries look like a family home. And there's a television just popped off on one of the credenzas on the side. And I came back into the room one day and Dad was fully stretched out on the couch, had turned the telly on, put the footy on, and his and it's hard, but his dead baby, his stillborn baby, was snuggled into his chest in that classic dad style of the baby lying on their chest watching the footy. And I just walked in and I went, what more do you need? Like, it was just, he parented his boy in that moment in the way that he needed to do. So to say, as a funeral company, that we've got a space for you to come to where if you want to, you can watch the footy and cuddle your dead baby. Yep, we can do that. And that's why it's a specialist response, because with no aspersion on any other funeral company, conventionally, that's not a service that's been offered. It's not that anybody's done anything wrong. They just don't offer it. And so we just thought, no, there has to be a way of creating moments for these parents that lets them parent their child. And we've got many, many, many other examples of how we create parenting opportunities in that minute, so that they can release their baby, knowing that they got every single moment that they could.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Mm-hmm. Now, you're also the founder and managing director of the Willow Tree Foundation. Do you mind sharing your story about why you started the organisation?
In a way, it's similar to the response to infant care. Pediatric death is awful. It's just awful. The loss of a child. And again, we talked before about differing grief. And that does not imply more or less in any way. It's just different. And the parenting a child that's dying or parenting a child who's died suddenly is a very different, again, experience than if an elder dies, or if a 55-year-old dies, or even if a pregnancy is lost, because that child has lived their own life. And again, does not imply any degree of better or worse. It's just different. Mm. And often there's other children in the household, or and friends and school community and sports that they've belonged to and all sorts of things. So the care of children and young people. So the Willow Tree, we provide guidance and care and support to families with children up to dependent 25. So uni students and everybody, anyway that's still dependent. And the responses are different and very specific. They take a lot of time. There's a sort of a bit of a misunderstanding in the community that a child's funeral or a baby's funeral should be cheaper than an adult's funeral. And they are, because the funeral industry generally is very kind and does make these things cheaper, but they actually are a lot more work. There's so much more complexity of grief in the pediatric death, and so many more people. Grandparents are deeply, deeply involved. Aunties, uncles, schools, teachers, mates, friends, the friends' parents, the friends' sibling. Like, it's huge, absolutely huge. So that takes a very, very committed and personalised approach. And we felt that we could share those resources by setting up a charity and having that not-for-profit environment to be able to make those resources really available and comfortably referred by health settings in particular. So the health sector is very, very loath to refer to a private provider, particularly in the funeral industry. And so we just wanted to make those resources really available, usable by anyone. No obligation to do anything, just take the information and go. And so that's where the Willow Tree came from. And it's growing all the time. There's so much work that can be done in that space. One of our most closely held opportunities that we have through the Willow Tree is to work with other stakeholders. So we connect with, there's a couple in Australia, there's 3 primary children's hospices in Brisbane, in Sydney and in Melbourne. And there's a group growing to create one in Perth as well. And we work with the stakeholder, with the other, the participants in those places to provide education on how to support children's bodies after death, in after-death care at the hospice. What are the funeral choices that are available? How can we minimise costs? So stakeholder education and sharing what we know so that others can give it to others freely and without cost is really important to us. And that's what the Willow Tree is for.
That's amazing, because so commonly you find organisations that protect, especially in the corporate environment, protect that information and make sure that they don't share it. So the fact that you've actually set this up with the purpose of actually sharing those resources across the board and, sharing those experiences of what you've learned with the other organisations is fantastic. That's really, really beautiful, especially in a space where it's so needed. So it's really lovely.
Yeah, thank you.
And obviously, you have a lot of experience, Libby. From your experience, what would you say that you think is the hardest thing that you see families dealing with when it comes to the death of a loved one?
I think the hardest thing is tension or even conflict between what people thought a person wanted and what they either did want or what another decision maker thought they wanted. So on an easily explainable level, one sibling might say, "Mum absolutely wanted to have mass," and then the other sibling might say, "No, Mum's got cranky with the church in the last couple of years, and I don't know that she would have wanted that anymore." And so I'm just picking something easy to explain. Or I want pink flowers and she wanted purple. I don't know, pick something.
Yeah.
And the gift, the absolute gift that is an advanced care directive and some form of instructions can be jotted down on the back of a serviette and chucked in the top drawer. It doesn't matter what it is. But yes, I would like burial or cremation. Yes, I would like mass to be said for me, or no, do not take me to church. Yes, I would. Yes, I wouldn't. No, I would. No, I wouldn't. Just some even very, very simple instructions. The gift it gives to families who can say, this is what mum wanted. And that those instructions allow plenty of room for choice and personalising. I'm not a subscriber to prepaid funerals and dictating from the grave, this is what will happen. But I absolutely know that if every single one of us could leave instructions or a guide to the people that love us that say, please bury me, don't cremate me, or, then that it's just a gift. It's an act of love. And we're also scared of having these conversations. And I don't want to upset people is the commonly said thing. But the upset that's caused by not having those conversations is heartbreaking, really, and can split families. So it's a gift. It's responsible. Please just plan. Doesn't have to be detailed and complex, but plan and share with your family what you want. And if we got that fixed, then a lot of the grief I see would be minimised or even avoided.
Well, I think that's exceptionally good advice, Libby.
I thought you might.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we finish up, Libby?
Oh no, I think your questions have been marvellous and interesting and a bit different than what is commonly asked. So that's great. I think no, I don't know. I think it all comes down to authenticity, Catherine. If people die in their preferred place, if they die with the things around them that they can smell what they like, that they hear happy voices, that they could hear the radio going on the same station that they always had, that their last thing they taste is really good champagne or a fresh beer or a little dob of something on their tongue. If the people around them are cared for, you can die comfortably. And if that happens, then the people that have loved you can recover. They recover well. No, this idea of closure is rubbish, but if you can recover, you can integrate loss into your future and you can carry that person with you with a smile on your face. Even if there's still lots of tears, you can still have a smile on your face. And I think we can prepare for death well. I think we can experience death consciously. And if we hold each other holistically and gently, then we can have people we love die and we can be okay. And that I think is that comes to an issue of our well-being. It's a health issue. We can minimize complicated bereavement outcomes. That then has an impact on our health budget and our health systems. We don't have to be destroyed by death. It can be okay.
Well, thank you for the part that you and your team play in making it that little bit easier for families as well.
Thank you. What a pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks, Libby.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Don't Be Caught Dead, brought to you by Critical Info. If you liked the episode, learnt something new, or were touched by a story you heard, we'd love for you to let us know. Send us an email, even tell your friends. Subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. If you can spare a few moments, please rate and review us as it helps other people to find the show. Are you dying to know more? Stay up to date with Don't Be Caught Dead by signing up to our newsletter and follow us on social media. Head to don'tbecaught.dead.com for more information and loads of resources.